She didn't shout it. That's the part one keep coming back to. My daughter Betty looked me straight in the face at the breakfast table, poured herself a second cup of coffee, and said it the way you'd say, "Pass the salt." "Mom, that emergency fund of yours is just sitting there. It's not doing anything. You need to give it to us. Or you need to start looking for somewhere else to live." I was 68 years old. I had spent 34 years working as a registered nurse. I had watched people die. I had held strangers' hands in their last moments. I had seen things that stay with you forever. I thought I had seen everything, but I had never seen my own daughter look at me like I was a problem to be solved. My name is Christine Siegel. I live in Dayton, Ohio, and I want to tell you exactly what happened. Stay with me. It was a Tuesday in October. I remember that specifically because Tuesdays were the days I volunteered at the Dayton Literacy Center on Stanley Avenue. I had been going there every week since I retired, for years prior, helping adults learn to read. It gave my week a shape. It gave me a reason to get dressed properly and be somewhere by 9 a.m. I was at the kitchen table with my oatmeal and my second cup of coffee. The house was Betty and Gary's, a 3-bedroom colonial on Greenfield Drive in Beaver Creek, a suburb of Dayton. I had been living in their spare room for 14 months at that point. Emma, my granddaughter, had already left for school. She was 9 years old, and she always slammed the door when she left, not out of anger, just enthusiasm. She was that kind of child. All of her feelings happened at full volume. Gary had left for work at 7. He was a regional manager for a logistics company. Long hours, a lot of driving, a man who was always somewhere between where he'd been and where he was going. It was just Betty and me in the kitchen. She was at the counter making her work lunch. She was a dental office manager in Centerville, and she had a way of preparing for her day the same way every morning, packing her lunch bag with exactly the same items in exactly the same order. She was always organized. That was true of her even as a little girl. She kept her room in a way that made me look disorganized by comparison, and I was a nurse. Nurses are not disorganized people. She zipped her lunch bag. She turned around. She poured her second cup of coffee. And then she said it.
"Mom, I've been meaning to bring this up. That emergency fund you have, the $67,000. It's just sitting there in that savings account. You're not using it. Gary and I have been talking, and honestly, we need it more than that account does. We'd like you to transfer it to us, or we're going to need to start thinking about different arrangements."
I looked at her. I thought about all the things I could say. I said nothing for a moment. I just looked at her face, the same face I had watched come into the world 68 years after my own, in a hospital room in Kettering where I knew every nurse on the floor by name. The face I had worried over and prayed for and driven to swim meets at 5:15 in the morning in the dark Ohio winters. That face was now giving me a deadline on my own savings. "I heard you," I finally said. She nodded like that was a reasonable response. She picked up her lunch bag. She kissed me on the cheek, actually kissed me, and she walked out the door to her car. And I sat there at that kitchen table in my daughter's house in the room that was not mine with my oatmeal going cold. And I thought, when did I get here? I want to tell you, because it didn't happen overnight. It never does. My name is Christine Siegel. I was born in Springfield, Ohio, in 1956. I grew up the second of 4 children. My father worked at the International Harvester plant until it closed, and my mother cleaned houses until her knees gave out. We were not wealthy. We were comfortable in the way working families were comfortable. Then the bills got paid, there was food on the table, and nobody talked much about what was hard. I became a nurse because it was what made sense to me. I liked people. I liked fixing things. I liked being in a room where something actually mattered. I got my RN at Sinclair Community College in Dayton in 1977. I worked at Miami Valley Hospital for 19 years. Then I moved over to Soin Medical Center in Beaver Creek, where I worked for 15 more. I specialized in cardiac care. I spent my career watching people's hearts, literally and otherwise. I married Earl Siegel in 1981. Earl was a mechanical engineer. He was quiet in the way that some men are, not cold, just internal. He thought before he spoke. He made me feel like what I said mattered because he actually listened to all of it before he responded. We had Betty in 1983. Then we had Kimberly in 1986. We had a good marriage, not a perfect one. We had the arguments every couple has and some specific to us, but we had a real partnership. We made decisions together. We were honest with each other. When Earl was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2016, I took a leave of absence from the hospital, and I cared for him at home for 9 months. That is what we did for each other. That is what our marriage was. He died in March of 2017. After Earl died, I had a period of about 6 months where I functioned the way you function when you're running on nothing but routine. I went through the motions. I got up. I fed the cat. I went to work. I came home. I did not do this gracefully. I did it the only way available, which was one day at a time. Then I retired. May of 2019. I was 63. I had my Social Security starting at 64. I had planned that timing carefully, and I had Earl's pension from the engineering firm, which came to me as the surviving spouse. Between the two, I had right around $2,400 a month coming in. I also had savings which I had been building for years, and which included the $67,000 I'd put aside specifically for medical emergencies. I want you to understand that fund, because it matters. I was a cardiac nurse for 34 years. I watched what happened to people who had no money when their body turned on them. I watched families scramble. I watched people make terrible medical decisions because they couldn't afford the good ones. I watched people go into debt in their 70s over medication costs. I watched people die sooner than they should have because they waited too long on a symptom because they were afraid of the bill. I promised myself I would not be that person. So every year for the last 12 years of my career, I put money specifically aside, labeled it untouched for my own future medical costs. Not luxuries, not travel, not a boat. Medical costs, the costs that come for everyone. Eventually, that was the fund Betty wanted after Earl died. I stayed in our house on Fenwick Court in Kettering, a brick ranch we bought in 1988, paid off by 2004. It was mine. I had a neighbor, Dorothy Mack, who was 71 and had the most precise vegetable garden I have ever seen. We had a standing Thursday night arrangement, dinner at one of our houses, rotating, and one episode of whatever we were watching at the time. I was not a lonely person. I was a person who had lost someone and was learning what her life looked like now. In early 2022, Betty called. She and Gary were having trouble. Their house needed a new roof. The estimate came in at $22,000. Gary's car needed a transmission. The dental practice where Betty worked had cut hours because of staffing issues, and she'd taken a temporary pay cut. The numbers weren't adding up. She wasn't asking me for money. Not directly. That was never how Betty operated. She would describe the full picture, and then let the silence do the asking. I keep thinking, she said, about that spare room. It's just sitting empty, and you're alone in that big house. Emma keeps asking why Grandma doesn't live closer. The spare room, the proximity to Emma, the math that worked for everybody. Here is what I will tell you honestly. I had reservations. I discussed it with Dorothy over Thursday dinner. Dorothy listened the way she always did without interrupting. And then she said, Christine, a spare room in your daughter's house is not your home. I want you to hear me say that. I heard her. I told her she was being cautious. I sold the house on Fenwick Court in April of 2022 after the closing costs and a small outstanding equity line I'd taken out to repair the furnace 2 years prior. I cleared $141,000. I added it to my existing savings. I kept the $67,000 emergency fund separate, untouched, in its own account. I moved the rest to a high-yield savings account. I moved into the spare room on Greenfield Drive on a Saturday in May. Betty and Gary had painted it a nice cream color. Emma had drawn a welcome sign in crayon and taped it to the door. For the first few months, I told myself I had made the right choice. I almost believed it. If you have ever lived with a slow leak, you know this feeling. You don't notice it at first. You see the small wet spot on the ceiling, and you think, that's nothing, that'll dry. And then it doesn't dry. And then the spot gets bigger. And by the time you understand what's happening, the damage is already done. That's what the financial requests felt like. They started in July of 2022, about 2 months after I moved in. Gary's car was fully repaired, but the repair had cost more than expected. Could I help with the electric bill this month? Just this once, because things were tight. It was $187. I said, of course. I paid it and didn't mention it again. In August, Emma needed school supplies. Betty was running late to pick them up. Could I grab them on my way back from the literacy center? I said yes. At Target, the list ran long. Notebooks, folders, a new backpack because Emma had outgrown her old one, a set of colored pencils, hand sanitizer, Kleenex. I spent $94. I put it on my debit card and didn't ask for it back. In September, Emma needed new tennis shoes. She had grown 2 sizes since spring. I was there when Betty noticed in the shoe department at Kohl's. Betty looked at the price tag and hesitated. I said, I'll get these. Betty said, Mom, you don't have to. I said, I know. I paid $68. In October, Gary's truck needed new tires. They didn't ask me directly, but Gary mentioned it at dinner, said it was bad timing, said it was one of those months. I wrote them a check for $400. Gary said thank you with a sincerity that felt real. Betty hugged me. None of these things individually was alarming. You don't see the flood from the first drop of rain. By November, the requests had a pattern, though I hadn't named it yet. Betty had developed a habit of describing financial stress at dinner in front of me, but without asking me directly. She would mention a bill. She would mention Gary's overtime was reduced. She would mention something Emma needed. And she would go quiet. And I would say, what does that come to? And she would tell me, and I would help. I want to be clear. I was not doing this reluctantly. I am not the kind of person who helps while secretly resenting it. I did it because they were my family, because Emma needed things, because I had the money and they were struggling. That is not a bad impulse. That impulse is called love. What I did not see was that nobody was tracking it. There was no acknowledgement, no running tally, no, Mom, totals so far this year, we've asked you for X. We want you to know we see that. The transactions happened and then disappeared. Like they had never happened. Like they were simply the cost of my living there, a rent paid in cash that nobody named rent. I paid for Emma's school pictures in November. $48. I paid for a plumber when a pipe under the bathroom sink started dripping. $210. I paid for Christmas dinner. I planned the menu, bought the groceries, cooked for 2 days. Betty's sister Kimberly came, and Kimberly's husband David, and their 2 boys, Marcus and Tyler. It was a good Christmas, loud and full and warm. I paid $340 for the food and supplies. I paid for Betty and Gary's anniversary dinner in January because Betty mentioned she hadn't been out to a real restaurant since before Emma was born, and Gary said, we'll get there when things ease up. I made a reservation at Meadowbrook in Dayton and told them it was my gift. Gary seemed genuinely surprised. Betty cried a little. I paid for Emma's dental copay 3 times when Betty forgot her insurance card. I paid for the water bill when the automated payment failed. I replaced the kitchen faucet, not because anyone asked, but because it had been dripping for 2 weeks and Gary hadn't had time to fix it, and it was driving me to distraction. By March of 2023, I had spent, outside of my own personal expenses, somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000 on things I had never been asked to pay for and had never agreed to pay for. I hadn't counted it exactly. I should have been counting. None of it was discussed. None of it was returned. None of it was mentioned. My Social Security came in at $1,380 a month. My survivor's pension from Earl's firm came in at $1,090. Total, $2,470 a month. I paid my own car insurance, my phone, my prescriptions. I take a blood pressure medication and a low-dose aspirin. Nothing expensive, but I paid for them myself. I contributed to groceries, paying for roughly half the household food without being asked. I did the laundry for the whole house. I walked Emma to and from the bus stop every day. I was, by any reasonable measure, earning my keep and then some. But nobody said so, and I didn't require them to. That was my mistake, because when you do not name a thing, the other person gets to name it for you. And Gary was about to name it. It started with a spreadsheet. That is how Gary operated. He was a logistics man, and he organized problems the way a logistics man would, in columns with headings and totals at the bottom. It was a Saturday evening in April 2023. Emma was at a sleepover at her friend Brianna's house. Betty and I had eaten dinner together, pasta and salad, and Gary came home from a late work meeting and sat down at the kitchen table without changing out of his work clothes, which was unusual for him. He usually changed the minute he got home. Wearing his work clothes to the dinner table was, I realized only later, intentional. He wanted the authority of the work clothes. He had a folder. He opened it and placed 2 sheets of paper on the table. He slid one toward me. I've been going over our finances. He said, I want to be transparent with you. I looked at the sheet. It was a household expense breakdown. Mortgage, $1,870. Home insurance, $190. Utilities, electric, gas, water, $340 average. Groceries, $680. Car insurance for 2 vehicles, $280. Gary's truck payment, $450. Betty's car, paid off. Internet and streaming, $90. Emma's school expenses, sports, supplies, activities, $175 per month average. He had a total at the bottom. It came to $4,075 per month. Then he had it divided by what he called household members contributing to expenses. He had listed 3, himself, Betty, and me. My third, $1,358 per month. I looked at him. He was looking at the paper, not at me. You're receiving $2,400 a month, he said, between Social Security and the pension. About that, yes.
You're contributing some here and there, groceries, bills when we're short. But nothing consistent. Nothing we can plan around. Based on household expenses, your share would be $1,358 a month. That still leaves you over $1,000 for your personal needs.
Betty was at the table too, though she had not looked at me since Gary started talking. She was looking at her own copy of the spreadsheet.
I've also done some work for childcare too. If we were paying someone to pick Emma up from school, drive her to activities, be here when she gets home, a part-time nanny would run us around $1,200 a month. You provide that service. So there's value there. I'm not discounting that.
It was the not discounting that told me how this conversation had been practiced. Then Betty said,
What we'd like is something regular. Something we can count on. The $1,358 figure. We're not asking you to pay rent exactly. We're asking you to contribute fairly to the household you're living in.
I sat with that for a moment. I contribute to groceries every week. I said, I cook. I clean. I do all the laundry. I take care of Emma before and after school, 5 days a week. Gary said,
We know, we appreciate all of that. This isn't about what you do around the house. It's about the finances.
I've been helping with the finances, I said, since May of last year. Here and there, he said again. That phrase, here and there, was doing a specific job in this conversation. It was making everything I had done sound like nothing. What about the emergency fund? I said, because I wanted to get it on the table. I wanted to know if that's where this was going. Gary glanced at Betty. We'll get to that. And there it was. There was a second conversation inside this conversation. Go ahead, I said. Gary reached back into the folder and pulled out a third sheet. He placed it on the table. This one showed my savings accounts, not the specifics, but the total. I didn't know how he knew the total. I found out later that Betty had seen a statement I had left on the printer.
You have the house sale money and you have the emergency fund, the $67,000 in the separate account. That $67,000 has been sitting untouched for years. We're not in a hypothetical situation here. We're in a real one. The mortgage payment went up $240 a month in January because of the escrow adjustment. My overtime was cut in February. Betty's office just reduced her hours again because they lost a dentist and they're still hiring. We are behind on 3 things simultaneously and we have a kid to raise. That money sitting in a savings account doing nothing could stabilize this family for the next 2 years. We're not asking you to give it all away. We're asking you to be part of this household. Really part of it.
I looked at that spreadsheet. I thought about $67,000. I thought about every patient I had ever watched make a healthcare decision based on what they could afford rather than what they needed. I thought about a woman I had cared for in 2009, 71 years old, who had a significant cardiac event that was entirely treatable, but who had delayed coming to the hospital for 4 days because she was worried about the bill. She survived, but she had permanent damage that she would not have had if she had come in on day 1. I thought about being that woman. I thought about being 75 and having a medical need and having no buffer and having to ask my daughter, this daughter, the one currently looking at the table, whether I could afford to go to the hospital. I hear what you're saying. I said, I need some time to think about all of this. Gary said, how much time? A few days, I said. He nodded, the kind of nod that says, fine, but the answer should already be clear. Betty said, we love you, Mom. This is just us being honest. I said I knew that. I stood up. I put my dishes in the sink. I said goodnight. I went to my room, which was not my room, and I lay on my bed, which was not my bed, and I looked at the ceiling for a long time. I did not sleep for most of that night. 3 days passed. I did not give them an answer. I went to the literacy center on Tuesday. I cooked dinner on Wednesday. I took Emma to school on Thursday. Life in the house continued as if the conversation had not happened, which was its own kind of pressure. The silence was not peaceful. It was a held breath. On Thursday evening, Betty came to my room. She knocked, which she did not always do. She sat on the edge of the small chair by the window, the one I had brought from the house on Fenwick Court. Mom, she said, I wanted to talk without Gary. I sat up. I thought maybe this was going to be something different. I know the other night was a lot. She said, Gary can be very, she searched for the word, direct. He was clear, I said. He was. She folded her hands.
Mom, the truth is we're in real trouble. The mortgage is the thing that worries me most. We cannot fall behind on it. If we go into default, we lose this house. Emma's school district. Everything we've built here. I know that's not your problem. But your family. You're here. And that money is just sitting there.
It's not sitting there, I said. It has a purpose. You've been healthy, she said. You're on 2 medications, both generic, both cheap. You're not sick. That money has been in that account since you were 58, and you haven't touched it once. What exactly are you saving it for? I looked at my daughter. I'm saving it for the thing I don't know is coming yet. I said, that's what an emergency fund is. She looked at me. Something moved across her face. Not guilt exactly. Something more complicated.
Mom, I need you to hear me. Gary has looked at the numbers. If nothing changes, if we don't get some significant relief in the next 60 days, we are going to have to sell this house. And if we sell this house, we're looking at a rental somewhere. Smaller. No spare room.
There it was. She said it gently. She said it with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes soft and her voice careful. But there it was. Are you telling me, I said slowly, that if I don't give you the emergency fund, you won't have room for me? She looked down. I'm telling you the situation is serious and that we need you to be part of the solution. Give you the $67,000 or find somewhere else to live. I said. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I sat there for a moment. I wanted to feel anger. Anger would have been easier, but what I felt was something sadder than anger. I felt the specific grief of understanding something about someone you love that you had hoped was not true. My daughter was not a monster. I want to be clear about that because this story is easy to misread. Betty was not evil. She was a woman under financial pressure who had convinced herself that what she was asking for was reasonable because it was easier than looking at what she was actually doing. She had arrived at a place where she could not see the difference between her mother's emergency medical savings and a resource available for her use. That is what financial stress can do to people. It narrows their vision until they can only see what they need. But I was not a resource. I was her mother. I hear you, I said. I'll let you know. She nodded. She stood up. She reached over and squeezed my hand. She said, I love you, Mom. And I believed her. That was the hard part. I believed she meant it. And she was still asking me to hand over the money I had set aside for my own survival. She closed the door behind her. I sat in the chair by the window, the chair from Fenwick Court, and I thought about Dorothy, who had told me a spare room is not your home. Dorothy, who I had not called in 3 weeks because I had been managing the situation in my head without talking to anyone about it. I picked up my phone. Dorothy answered on the second ring. I told her everything. The spreadsheet, the $67,000, the no spare room. Dorothy was quiet through all of it. When I finished, she said, Christine, what do you actually want to do? I knew the answer. I had known it probably since the Saturday night with the spreadsheet. I just hadn't let myself say it yet. I want to leave, I said. I want my own place. Then let's figure out how you do that, Dorothy said. She stayed on the phone with me for 2 hours. And the next morning, I opened my laptop and I started doing the work I should have done 14 months earlier. I want to spend some time on this chapter because this is the part of the story I wish someone had told me before any of the rest of it happened. If you are a woman over 60 and you are living with an adult child or thinking about it or being pressured into it, please listen to this section carefully. The first thing I did was look at independent senior living options in the Dayton area. I had thought vaguely that senior living was either a nursing home or an assisted living facility, and I was 68 years old and in good health, and neither of those applied to me. I had never seriously researched what was in between. What I found surprised me. There is a whole category called independent living communities. These are not care facilities. They are apartment complexes or cottage-style communities designed for adults, typically 55 and older, who are independent and healthy and simply want to live among people their own age without the physical demands of maintaining a house. In the Dayton area alone, I found 7 communities within 20 minutes of Betty's house on Greenfield Drive. I had driven past several of them without knowing what they were. The one that caught my attention was Oakwood Crossing on Far Hills Avenue in Kettering, which was about 9 minutes from Betty's house. It had 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom apartments, a community room, a small library, a fitness center, and organized activities, including a Thursday evening social, which Dorothy would have appreciated. The monthly cost for a 1-bedroom, fully independent unit, including utilities, was $1,450 to $1,680 depending on the floor and view. I could afford that. With my Social Security and Earl's pension, I had $2,470 a month. If I paid $1,600 for housing and utilities, I had $870 left for food, prescriptions, car insurance, phone, and personal expenses. That was tight, but workable. And it left my savings, both the regular savings and the emergency fund, completely untouched. I also looked into what I could do to bring in a little extra. I had been volunteering at the Literacy Center. They had mentioned once that they had a small paid coordinator role that might open up. I called and asked. The role was available, 4 hours a week, modest pay, but something. The second thing I researched was my Social Security protections. I was concerned, after what Gary had said about my income, that I needed to understand exactly what could and could not happen to it. Here is what I learned, and what I want every woman watching this to know. Your Social Security benefit is yours. It is paid to you personally. No one, no family member, no child, no spouse, no one can legally redirect your Social Security deposit without your consent. The Social Security Administration pays your benefit to the account you have designated, and only you can change that designation. If anyone pressures you to change where your deposit goes or asks for access to the account it deposits into, you have the right to say no. You can call the SSA directly. The third thing I looked into was Medicare and my options if a medical emergency did arise. As a nurse, I knew the basics, but I wanted to be specific about my situation. I am on Original Medicare, Part A and Part B, with a Medicare supplement plan that I had purchased when I retired. My plan covers most of what Original Medicare doesn't: the coinsurance, the copayments, the deductibles. My out-of-pocket exposure in a serious hospitalization is significantly lower than many people assume. I also have Part D for prescriptions. My 2 medications cost me $23 a month combined. What I had not calculated carefully before was what a major health event would actually cost me, even with good coverage. Things like extended skilled nursing care. If, for example, I had a serious surgery and needed rehabilitation afterward, can carry significant costs even with Medicare. This is one reason financial advisors often recommend that people in their 60s and 70s maintain a dedicated medical reserve. It does not have to be $67,000 for everyone, but it should be something. I had built mine carefully for 12 years. It was real. It was necessary. And I was not going to give it to cover a mortgage on a house I didn't own. The fourth thing I did was look into something I had heard about but never fully understood: senior financial protection resources. Ohio has one which advocates for the rights of older residents, including those living with family. There are also adult protective services programs in Montgomery County that handle financial exploitation of older adults, including by family members. I want to be careful here. I am not saying Betty and Gary were criminally exploiting me, but I am saying that what they were asking for, the transfer of my emergency medical savings under the implied threat of losing my housing, is in the category of things that those programs exist to address. And knowing that those resources existed made me feel less alone, less like I was overreacting, less like I was the difficult one. I called Dorothy back that evening and told her what I'd found. She said, "Christine, I have been waiting for you to use that brain I know you have." I scheduled a tour at Oakwood Crossing for the following Wednesday. I told Betty I had a dentist appointment. I walked through the model apartment. It was small, smaller than the house on Fenwick Court, much smaller. But it was clean and quiet, and there was a window in the kitchen that faced east, which meant morning light, which I have always needed to feel right about a day. The leasing coordinator, a woman named Susan, walked me through everything. The wait list was short, 2 to 3 months for a first-floor one-bedroom. I could potentially be in an apartment by July. I told Susan I wanted to put my name on the list. I drove back to Greenfield Drive, and I made chicken soup for dinner. Emma came home from school and showed me a paper she had gotten a B+ on and asked me if B+ was good. I told her B+ was very good, and that she should be proud. She said she thought so too, but wanted confirmation. That night, I slept better than I had in months. I gave myself 1 more week, not because I was undecided, I was decided, but because I wanted to do this right. I wanted to be calm. I did not want this to be a fight, because fighting with your daughter is different from fighting with anyone else. The wounds are in a different place. I also used that week to get my paperwork in order. I gathered every document that was mine, my Social Security card, my Medicare card, my Medigap insurance card, my pension statements, my car title, my bank records. I made copies of everything, and I put the originals in a lockbox in my car. Not because I believed Betty would take them, but because I was done leaving anything that mattered to me in a room that wasn't mine. I moved most of my savings, except the $67,000 emergency fund, which was already in its own account, into a new account at a separate bank. I did this calmly, without drama. I walked into the Fifth Third branch on Dorothy Lane and opened the new account and transferred the funds. The branch manager asked if everything was all right. I said everything was fine. I was reorganizing. That was accurate. I confirmed with Oakwood Crossing that my application was processing. Susan called on a Thursday and told me a first-floor one-bedroom had come available ahead of schedule. The previous resident had moved to be closer to her son in Cleveland. Susan said if I wanted it, I could be in by June 15th, 6 weeks away. I said yes. I told Dorothy. Dorothy said, "Christine, I'm going to drive down and help you pack." The conversation with Betty and Gary happened on a Sunday evening. Emma was at a birthday party. I had chosen the time deliberately. I wanted Emma out of the house. She did not need to witness this, and I did not want to have it in front of her. We sat at the kitchen table. The same table. The one with the spreadsheet 3 weeks earlier. I had my hands folded on the table. I had practiced what I was going to say the way I used to practice difficult conversations as a charge nurse, not to have a script, but to know my own position clearly before the other person's reaction could move me off it. "I've made my decision," I said. "I'm not going to transfer the emergency fund to you. I'm not going to sign over my Social Security or my pension, and I'm moving out. I found an apartment at Oakwood Crossing in Kettering. I'll be out by June 15th. There was a silence. Betty said, "You already found a place?" "Yes." "You've already decided?" "Yes." Her face did something I recognized from when she was a child, a quick cycling through several emotions before landing on the one she would use. She landed on hurt. "You made this decision without talking to us," she said. "After everything Betty," my voice was level. "We have been talking about this for weeks." Every version of the conversation ended with me handing over my emergency fund or losing my place to live. That is not a conversation. That is an ultimatum. Gary started to say something. I looked at him, and something in my face stopped him. I don't know exactly what it was. Maybe 34 years of being a charge nurse, of being the person in a room who needed to be heard. Whatever it was, he stopped. "I love this family," I said. "I love Emma more than I know how to say. I am not disappearing. I will still be 9 minutes away. I will still be her grandmother. but I am not able to stay in an arrangement where my financial security is treated as a household resource. Betty was crying now, not loudly, just tears, steady, the way they do when someone is genuinely hurt and not performing it. You think we're bad people, she said. No, I said, and this was true. I think you're under pressure, and I think that pressure changed what you were able to see. I think you stopped being able to see me as a person separate from your problem. She didn't answer. Gary said, what about Emma? Emma will see me every week. I said, that is a promise I am making to you right now, and I will keep it. Gary looked at Betty. Something passed between them that I couldn't read. Fine, Gary said. He pushed back from the table. That's your choice. He left the kitchen. Betty and I sat there for a while. She was still crying. I did not reach over and pat her hand the way I might have another time. I let her feel what she was feeling without managing it for her. That is something I had to learn to do, to not take responsibility for emotions that were not mine to fix. I hope someday you understand this, I said. She wiped her eyes. She nodded, small. I'm still your mother, I said. That doesn't change. She nodded again. I got up. I washed my coffee cup. I went to my room and I started making a list of what I would need to pack. Dorothy arrived the following Saturday in her Subaru with boxes she had collected from the liquor store on Beaverdale, because those are the sturdiest boxes for moving. We spent the day packing methodically and talking about nothing important, old movies, her vegetable garden, a book she had just finished. Emma came home midday and sat on my bed watching us pack, very serious, occasionally handing me things to put in boxes. At one point, Emma said, Grandma, are you moving because you're mad at us? I set down what I was holding. I sat on the bed next to her. I'm moving because I found a place that's mine. I said, the way this house is your mom and dad's. Every person needs a place that's theirs. She thought about this. Can I come visit? Whenever your mom says it's okay, I said, and I'll come here, and we'll go places together. Nothing about us changes. She seemed to accept this. She helped me pack my books. June 15th, Dorothy's Subaru and my Buick made 2 trips. The apartment at Oakwood Crossing smelled like fresh paint and cleaning solution. Susan had left a card on the kitchen counter that said, Welcome home. I put it on the refrigerator. I unpacked my books first, then my quilt, then the photograph from Betty's graduation. 1990, Kettering High School, me in the bleachers with my arm around Earl, both of us looking at a girl in a cap and gown who had no idea what was coming for her. Or us. I set it on the kitchen windowsill where the morning light would find it. Dorothy and I ordered Chinese food. We ate it at my kitchen table, my chairs, my kitchen, and we talked until 11 p.m. Then Dorothy drove back to Kettering and I washed the dishes and I got into my own bed and I pulled my own quilt over me. I slept like a stone. That was 8 months ago. I want to tell you what my life looks like now because I think that matters as much as what happened. My apartment at Oakwood Crossing is 740 square feet. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with east-facing windows, and a small living room with a sliding door that opens onto a patio. There is a hook outside the patio door where I hung a bird feeder the 2nd week. I was there. By the 3rd week, the Cardinals had found it. I have a routine again. I am at the Dayton Literacy Center on Tuesdays and Thursdays now. They hired me for the part-time coordinator role, which gives me a modest extra income and something more than anything else to do with 2 mornings a week that feel meaningful. I make coffee at 7 a.m. and I read for an hour before anything else happens. I walk in the evening around the Oakwood Crossing campus, which has a half-mile path around the perimeter with good lighting. I have met people. There is a woman named Harriet on the 2nd floor who was a retired chemistry teacher at Stivers School for the Arts. We discovered a shared opinion about a specific type of person, the kind who speaks loudly on speakerphone in public, and that turned into a friendship. We have coffee on Tuesday mornings before I leave for the literacy center. There is a Thursday social in the community room that I was skeptical about, and now attend faithfully. Last week we played a trivia game, and my team won because I knew that the first open heart surgery was performed in 1893 by Dr. Daniel Hale Williams in Chicago. 34 years of cardiac nursing is good for something. Dorothy comes down from Kettering every few weeks. She says the drive takes 22 minutes and that she doesn't mind it at all. Now, Betty, I want to be honest about this part because I am not interested in a story with a tidy resolution that is not real. Betty and I did not speak for about 6 weeks after I moved out. She sent one text about 2 weeks after I left that said, "I hope you're happy there." I read it several times. I could not tell what it was meant to do. I wrote back, "I am. I love you." She didn't respond. The silence was hard. I am not going to tell you it wasn't. Betty is my daughter. I have known her for 41 years. There is no clean way to describe what it is to be estranged from someone whose voice you have known since before they could use words. It is a specific kind of grief, and it sits differently than other losses. Kimberly called me in July. Kimberly is my younger daughter. She lives in Columbus with her husband David and their boys Marcus and Tyler. Kimberly had been watching the situation from a distance, and she called to say, simply, "Mom, you did the right thing. I want you to know I think so." I cried on the phone with Kimberly, not for long, but genuinely. Emma called in August. She navigated to my contact on Betty's phone by herself and called me on a Wednesday evening. She said she had started 4th grade. She said her teacher's name was Mrs. Kowalczyk and that she liked her. She said she missed me. I was in my car in the Kroger parking lot when the call came, and I sat there for 10 minutes after we hung up, not moving, just feeling it. I go every other Saturday now and take Emma somewhere. The Art Institute, Museum of Discovery, the Metro Park when the weather is good. I pick her up from the house on Greenfield Drive. Betty and I exchange polite words at the door. It is not warm, but it is not broken beyond repair either, and I am patient. I have always been patient. Gary and I do not speak. I have thought a great deal in these 8 months about what I would tell a woman who is in the position I was in. Not my position now, my position then. The woman sitting in the spare room in her daughter's house, spending money she was never asked to spend, losing the shape of herself. Here is what I would tell her. Your children loving you and your children treating you with financial respect are not the same thing. They can coexist, and in a good arrangement they do. But if one is present and the other is not, you are allowed to name that. You are not being ungrateful. You are not being difficult. You are being a person. Your emergency fund, your retirement savings, your Social Security, your pension, these are not community property. They are yours. They exist because you worked, you planned, you sacrificed, and you understood that no one was going to take care of your financial needs except you. The fact that they are now accessible does not make them available. If you are a senior living with family and you feel financially pressured or financially unsafe, there are people whose job is to help. You can call, and they will connect you with resources in your area. Adult Protective Services in your county handles financial exploitation of older adults, including by family members. You have more options than you think. More than you think. The $67,000 emergency fund is still in its account, untouched. I added to it this past January a small amount from the part-time coordinator income. It is not a number on someone else's spreadsheet. It is my future, my ability to get care when I need it without asking permission, without calculating whether I can afford to be sick. I am 68 years old. I am in good health. I take 2 medications and walk half a mile in the evenings and eat soup I make myself on Sunday afternoons. I have cardinals at my bird feeder and a library card and a trivia team that is frankly unbeatable. I am not lonely. Loneliness is a different thing from living alone. I lived in a house with 3 people and felt more alone than I do now in 740 square feet that are entirely mine. Here is the last thing I want to say, and I want to say it directly, woman to woman. You spent decades giving. You raised children. You worked. You kept houses and managed crises and showed up for people in every way that people can show up. You were the one who held it together when it needed holding. You were present at every difficult moment, and you gave of yourself without accounting for what you were giving. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to keep something for yourself. Not because you've earned it, though you have, but because you are a person, and persons need resources and space and autonomy. Not luxury, not excess, just what is yours. Your retirement is not a line item in someone else's budget. Your medical fund is not a household expense to be divided. Your income is not a contribution to be managed and distributed by someone else. You worked for it. It's yours. And you are worth protecting, even if the person you have to protect yourself from is someone you love.